Hey guys, Todd here. Today we're going to install the Amp Research running boards on this 2020 Ram 2500 crew cab. For this installation, I'll be using 4mm and 3/16 Allen wrenches, 13mm 9/16 wrench, a ratchet with 10mm, 13mm and T27 torque sockets, a tape measure, a wire stripper and crimper, a drill with 9/32 and 1/8" bits, a rivet tool, and a heat gun. Now make sure you're subscribed to our channel to stay up to date with all our latest content. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, now the brackets that hold your power boards to your truck are specific. You're gonna have two per side, one in the rear, one in the front on each side. So what I have here is driver side brackets. So if you're facing the truck and you look to the rear, this is what your rear driver side bracket is gonna look like. This is retracted, this is deployed. This is where it attaches to the rocker panel of your truck, and this is where it attaches the running board. Now, on the rear driver side, this portion, the foot, is going to be set in, offset towards the center of the vehicle, pointing towards the front. On the front bracket is kind of the same situation. Front bracket also has a gear for a motor. I'm going to go ahead and put the gear cover on the table here, but if you extend this out, the foot is going to be facing towards the rear. Either of these, if the foot is facing the wrong way, that goes to the passenger side, not the driver's side. Now, in your instructions, it says go ahead and put your motor and attach it to your bracket right now, but I typically find it a little bit easier to install this first, so we're going to do that, which brings us to this piece here. This is what we're going to need to use to prep the bottom of the truck. So let's go ahead and show you how that installs. Okay, now this is our first bracket location. What I've got here is a couple of hexagon-shaped holes just behind the front tire. This is on the inside of the rocker panel. Now, if you've already got threaded holes here, you can skip this step. If you do not have threaded holes, so they're just open hexagon-shaped holes, like you're gonna have on most of your heavy-duty trucks, this is what's going to need to be installed on the inside of the rocker panel. So that's actually gonna get fished through that hole, and these are gonna line up to the hexagon-shaped holes like so. So in order to get this installed, what we're first going to do is hang it, kind of opposite way onto the rocker panel. Then these are what we're going to install. These are riv nuts or nutserts. If you notice, they've kind of got a hexagon shape up at the top of them. We're going to go ahead and line those up to our holes. And once those are in place, you'll notice we've also got a hole in the center. That's to line everything up. So I'm going to take my center punch and I'm center punching the spot where I need to drill. Now I'm going to take an 1/8" drill bit and drill a hole in the rocker panel right there. Okay, now this little spot right there is where I've just center punched. I've got my 1/8" drill bit. I did put a little bit of cutting oil on the end of it. I want to make sure it's right on that spot. Okay, now you may notice we've got some black paint right here. I did that because we just drilled a hole. I wanted to seal that off to keep it from rusting. Next, we can go ahead and take this. The tab is going to go to the outside, but we can go ahead and start routing this into the rocker panel through this oval hole. We want to make sure that the holes on the bracket line up to these holes here. Now, you're going to have to hold that in place. I like to work this side to this side. So I'm going to go ahead and insert the nutsert. And it does take a little bit of holding everything still and wiggling everything around to get it to line up. Next, I'm going to insert the pop rivet. And finally, my last nutsert. All right, now one thing we want to do is make sure before we set this pop rivet that this bracket is nice and flush against the inside of the rocker panel. You can use your finger and make sure that's the case. And now we can go ahead and set this pop rivet with a rivet gun. All right, next you're also going to have a kit in order to crush these nutserts. We've got a long bolt. I've already got a little bit of lubricant on that bolt. It's going to go through a washer and then through the sleeve. Now you'll notice it's got a little bit of a neck on the end of the sleeve that goes towards the open end of the rib cert, or the rib nut. What we're going to do is I'm going to push that through. That sleeve goes fit perfectly into a 9/16 box end wrench, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in there hand tight for right now. All right, once I've got that in there, I'm going to take a 13 millimeter and start tightening that down. Now you want to get it tight enough, but don't over tighten it to where you strip everything out. So it's going to be about 3.5 turns. Hold the 9/16 still while you turn the 13 millimeter. All right, now that it's tightened down, I'm going to go ahead and back out the 13 millimeter. That completely crushes the threads on the inside of the nutsert, drawing it in and then sandwiching that plate in. I'm going to repeat the same on the next nutsert. Okay, now we still have this tab that's sticking out here. What we're going to do is take a flathead screwdriver and we're going to bend it up and then into the rocker panel so it doesn't block the bracket that we put in. Now repeat the same steps on the other 3 bracket locations. Okay, next what we want to do is both of these 2 threaded holes, we want to go ahead and use one of our long bolts with washer to thread into each one of those bolts, leaving about a 1/2 inch of threads out. Now, one thing I want to point out, the washer that is on here, you're going to have another set of washers that will also be for these bolts that go to the pinch weld. It is kind of confusing. They're very similar to size, but these washers will not fit on these bolts. So what I would do is separate these washers out so you don't actually have some of your larger opening washers on these bolts and not be able to find the right washers. So separate your washers. There you go. Now we're going to go ahead and take this and thread it into place. Now we've got about a 1/2 inch still sticking out. We're going to do the same thing on this one. All right, now we also want to make sure the washers are pulled all the way back to the head of the bolt, because we're going to hang the bracket in between the washer and the body of the truck. All right, so here is your driver's side front bracket. We're going to raise this up and drop it down on top of those. Those 2 bolts are going to rest inside those 2 notches. All right, now we've got our smaller bolts with washers. That's going to go from the outside of the pinch weld. What we're going to do is line up those holes to the pinch weld and get those threaded in. And we're going to snug those down with a T27 Torx bit. Okay, now holding our linkage arm out of the way, we're going to use a 13 millimeter open end wrench and tighten down these 2 bolts to the rocker panel. Okay, next what we want to do is take our linkage and pull it all the way down. Then we're going to go ahead and install our motor. Now, I want to point out that on the passenger side, the motor is going to install facing up towards the cab, and on the driver's side here, it's going to install facing kind of down towards the frame. But first, we need to install our cover, and then go ahead and line up these 3 holes with these 3 holes here. and that needs to go in. And while you're doing that, a lot of times you'll see the linkage move. That's so those gears can line up. Sometimes you might wiggle that linkage around to get this lined up. Once that's lined up, you can go ahead and take the screws that are in your kit with washers and go ahead and get those started. And then we can tighten those down with a 4mm Allen wrench. Okay, now for the rear bracket, we've actually only got one bolt in there for right now, and that is about a 1/2 inch of thread still hanging out. What we're going to do is we're going to take that bracket and we're going to hang it. There's only one notch that it's going to go into to initially get it hung in place. Make sure that the washer is on the bracket side, not on the cab side. Then we can take our other bolt, run it through the hole in the bracket, lift it up and get it inserted hand tight. All right, now we're not going to get it all the way flush because we still want this to be able to wiggle around so we can line up the pinch weld bolts. So we're going to go ahead and put those in there right now and then snug those down with a T27. All right, now we can go ahead and snug up our 13mm out here. All right, now holding the linkage up, we can go ahead and tighten down the inside with a 13mm open end wrench. Okay, now I've got the board, I'm setting it onto the bracket. You'll notice this little shelf on the board fits right over top of the bracket, and this cutout in the bracket fits the end cap of the board into it. You'll also notice we've got a metal tab that's got 2 threaded holes. We need to move that over to line those 2 holes up to these 2 holes in the bracket. So I'm gonna lift it up, line it over, and then drop it down into place. We're going to use our included Allen bolts to go up into those threaded holes. Okay, now before I tighten these down all the way, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the front bracket with the board, and then we're going to tighten these down front and back using a 3/16 Allen wrench. Now we can repeat this same process on the passenger side of the truck, then we can pop the hood and start running the wires. Okay, so I'm underneath the hood. I've gone ahead and taken the wire harness and routed it out kind of in the direction it's going to go. You'll notice I've got 2 connectors that are right here. They're right next to the negative battery terminal harness coming off the back side of the battery. What we're going to do is take our little brain box, it's going to set right in here, we're going to wire tie it in place to that large harness. Now, what we're also going to do is connect this to our harness, but make sure that whenever you're doing that, you've got everything lined up correctly. They only go together one way, and you want to make sure you don't force them the wrong way. Okay, with our main harness, we're going to have two long portions of harness that come off of that. The longer side goes to the passenger side because it has to go across the engine compartment. The shorter side is the driver's side. We're going to go ahead and route this down through this opening here, down the fender well and to the ground so we can run along the frame. We're going to do the same to the passenger side, and we're going to tie that out of the way. Okay, now this portion of the harness has two purple trigger wires. That needs to be routed inside the cab. So what I'll be doing is making a small incision on the steering boot, both on the engine compartment side and on the cab side. I'll slip a rod through from the cab side through those two slices. I'll tape off the trigger wires to that rod and then pull it back through into the cab. Okay, now I'm inside the cab. I've just run the two purple trigger wires into the cab. I'm going to go ahead and grab my Obd2 module. Now you'll notice I've got two bare purple wires coming off of that. Those are going to be spliced into our trigger wires. We're going to use our supplied connectors to do that. We've also got a 2-pin connector coming off of here. Now it's going to be very hard to see exactly where this is going, but we've got a 2-row bank that is green, that is directly above our e-brake pedal, kind of right on the opposite side of this spot right here. So we're going to see the two banks. We're going to find one of the open rows and plug this in. Then we can go ahead and connect this to our Obd2 port. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and connect the harness to the battery, but before I do that, I'm going to pull out the fuse and set that off to the side. And I'm going to connect it with a 10mm. All right, now we need to go ahead and install our lights. The way we're going to do that is first we're going to take from our door seam, come down to the pinch weld and measure 22 inches and then 64 3/4 inches along the pinch weld. Mark those spots and then we're going to drill them out to 9/32. Okay, I've already gone ahead and center punched it. Now I'm going to drill my pilot hole. All right, now we can go ahead and bring it out in 9/32. All right, now we're going to go ahead and deburr the hole and do the same for the next spot. Okay, now we've gone ahead and deburred these holes, and I also treated them with a little bit of paint so we don't have to worry about them rusting. Next, we're going to take these grommets out of our kit and fit them in there. Make sure they're seated all the way into the holes. Okay, now that I've got it fully seated, I did go ahead and put a little bit of lubrication inside the grommet. Now we're going to take our LED light, turn it around so it can face the rocker panel with our tape, and we're just going to fish it through. Once we get it up to the grommet, just kind of give it a little bit of a wiggle so it slides in nice and easy. And then we're going to make sure that we've got a good contact point with the rocker panel. I already did wipe that down with some rubbing alcohol. That's very important to do to get proper adhesion. We can go ahead and peel the protector off of our adhesive. Go ahead and push that up against there, hold it nice and tight against there for about 15 seconds, give it a good proper bond. We can repeat the same for all of our LED lights. Okay, now we're back underneath the truck. I've already got my driver's side harness run back behind the fender well, down behind the body mount bolt. What I'm going to do now is take and plug in my motor. All right, now we can come back here and strip away a little bit of the insulation from our harness wires and use our heat shrink butt connectors that are in our kit to connect them to the lights. Now we can go ahead and route the rest of the harness back along the frame to the next light location and then secure it the same way we did this one. Repeat the same process on the opposite side and secure everything with wire ties. All right, now back underneath the hood, we can go ahead and reinsert our fuse and test the operation of the steps. Now just go ahead and open the door. Step deploys, close the door, and after a brief delay, the step will retract. Now, if you run into a situation where with the door is closed, the step is deployed, and then when you open the door, the step retracts, it's actually fairly common. Just go back underneath your dash to your two purple trigger wires and swap the connection. Now, guys, that concludes the installation. If you found this video helpful, make sure and give us a thumbs up. If you want to know more about the product, check the link in the description below. As always, if you have any questions, call the experts or visit us online.